Hi, guys. If you've been around here long enough and you've been reading the comments to my talks, you've seen some posted here by a gent who goes by the AntiGynocentrist. His comments resonate with a lot of red pill men, as they do with yours truly. So much so that I've been prodding him for some time to consider blogging. Apparently, I annoyed him enough, and he finally started that blog, which I've linked below. He started with a great piece titled Men, Women, and the Importance of Individuality. I am betting that you'll like it, just as I'm betting that you will like the following two-part piece he wrote on the normalization of gynocentrism in response to the two talks I did by myself and Peter Wright, Chasing the Dragon and Slaying the Dragon. I'm honored that he's allowed me to share it with you by putting it on A Voice for Men and here on my YouTube channel, read by yours truly. Without further ado, let's get started. The Normalization of Gynocentrism by the AntiGynocentrist. Civilization is based on the capacity of human beings to control and manage their instinctual and emotional responses and behave in an intelligent manner. The degree to which that capacity is eroded by a lack of self-awareness, lack of cultural wisdom, lack of discipline, fatherlessness, and super responses to superstimuli is the degree to which civilization will decline, regress, and then implode. The ancient understanding that natural impulses can be destructive when taken to extremes was known thousands of years ago. As discussed in Paul Elam and Peter Wright's article, Slaying the Dragon, linked, this understanding was a major foundational element of many religions and addressed in cultural mythology, such as the 7 deadly sins of Christianity and the story of Odysseus resisting the siren's call. This ancient wisdom was recognized as key not to just the well-being of individuals, but also to the survival of civilizations over history. It is important to note that fathers have played a major role in teaching children to postpone gratification and regulate their instinctual and emotional impulses, as we've seen from Dr. Warren Farrell's research linked into the boy crisis. Unsurprisingly and predictably, fatherlessness has been one of the main factors driving the decline of Western civilization. There is a distinction between pathological behavior and instinct. Just because a behavior is driven by instinct does not then make the behavior healthy or biologically optimal to Darwinian fitness. Overeating is driven by instinct and can kill you before you reproduce and even prevent you from finding a mate in the first place. There is also a distinction between gynocentrism and human instincts. Gynocentrism is not itself an instinct, but rather a product of human instinct, emotional impulses, and cultural conditioning. Gynocentrism is a set of complex and pathological behaviors that arise from a super response to superstimuli associated with sex, neoteny, the parental brain, and pair bonding. See the article Chasing the Dragon, linked, for more information. Many animals, and especially human beings, have a capacity to regulate and control their behavioral responses to instinctual and emotional impulses from the lower areas of the brain. We have a well-developed prefrontal cortex and other areas of the cerebral cortex that have been shown in neuroscientific research, linked, to keep our behavioral responses to instincts in check. Whilst we may have no control over feeling our primal urges, we do have control over whether we decide to act on them and base decisions on them. We may experience anger, fear, and sexual attraction, but we can control whether or not we act on our instincts and impulses. It is a scientific fact that we have the capacity to control our behavior and override our instinctual impulses. It is also a readily provable fact and the reason we have a legal system. We recognize people have self-control over their decisions and actions. People go on hunger strikes and die from it, despite having a hunger instinct and survival instinct. There are numerous other examples of people overriding their survival instinct. Extreme sports, stunts from escape artists, and countless acts of bravery in war being such examples. There are numerous examples of people overriding their sexual instincts, too. There are heterosexual men that remain celibate their entire lives in the clergy on purpose. There are even in this hypersexualized culture sizable communities of people that still practice sexual abstinence before marriage. We have enormous control over our behavior. People do not see attractive people and then jump their bones and immediately have sex with them in public. We call that rape, by the way, which is a crime. We have self-control, and it is considerable in its power. It is worth considering that in the context of gynocentrism and the underlying super-response to superstimuli. Whilst the super-response leading to gynocentrism may indeed be strong, so is our ability to regulate our own behavior. In fact, our ability to control our own behavior can be so extreme that it can actually kill us. It is also the case that through self-discipline, training, and neuroplasticity, we can actually strengthen our neurological capacity to regulate our behavior even further. Fathers play a key role in developing that neurological capacity in children through teaching them to postpone gratification. We certainly have the capability to overcome gynocentrism. The literal interpretation of free will might be an illusion, but self-control does exist, and we have parts of the brain dedicated to exercising self-control. The fact is that the neurological process of self-control may in part lie beyond our conscious awareness does not negate the fact that we can and do regulate our behavior and suppress our instincts and emotional impulses very often. It is what makes Homo sapiens sapien, or wise. Our ability to postpone gratification of our instincts and impulses and control when, where, and even if we choose to satisfy them is one of the major traits responsible for allowing our species to do what no other animal on this planet has done: create civilization. The assumption, which is precisely what it is, that gynocentrism is some insurmountable and hardwired instinct and behavior we are slaves to, is complete and utter nonsense. That is not to say gynocentrism is not difficult to overcome or that it is not a powerful force within society. But it is not an omnipotent force either. It does not matter how many times it is said, there will still be some people that will call you a denier of biology if you dare to make the claim gynocentrism is not an immutable part of human behavior. All of human behavior is biological in part, not just gynocentrism. Stating that gynocentrism is biological certainly does not then automatically mean that it is immutable and insurmountable. Gynocentrism is a pathological set of behaviors driven by instincts and emotional impulses, just like overeating and obesity is driven by the hunger instinct. It does not automatically follow that the instincts and emotional processes that are involved in gynocentrism will invariably always produce gynocentrism. Just like it does not always follow that the hunger instinct will lead to overeating and obesity, or that the sexual instinct will lead to rape. Gynocentrism is merely one of many manifestations of the sexual instinct, desire to pair bond, our emotional response to neoteny, and our parental brain. The same general emotional response of neoteny drives millions of people daily to dog videos on YouTube. The same parental brain is active when raising children. The reason why gynocentrism is so common in society is because, unlike obesity and other addictive and pathological behaviors like smoking, we do not shame people for it or discourage it or teach people about the harms it will cause. People understand the risks of overeating, obesity, and smoking, and people are discouraged from doing it by wider society, with the exception of the fat acceptance people. People go to jail if they indiscriminately act on their sexual instincts. We normalize gynocentrism and actually encourage it. Imagine if we normalize and encourage smoking again. Gynocentrism is common because we normalize it in our culture. The culture at large reinforces and conditions us from a very early age to train our instincts and emotional responses to produce gynocentric behavior. Contrary to the opinion of some armchair evolutionary biologists, gynocentrism does not enhance the capacity of the species to perpetuate itself. Exhibiting indiscriminate deference to addressing the needs and wants of women and girls above everything else, the definition of gynocentrism, actually causes the complete opposite. It leads to extinction. It is not really hard to imagine how lopsided and imbalanced priorities could lead to dysfunctional and suboptimal outcomes in a complex system like society. The only reason why gynocentrism has not yet caused mass calamity is because gynocentrism, like obesity, was kept at bay for most of human history from getting to be too big of a problem. Thanks to the imperative and focus we had to maintain on our survival as a community and as individuals, and the limited means of communication over most of history, conditions simply did not permit gynocentrism to grow to a point where it threatened the survival of society. Only fairly recently, over the last few centuries, and particularly over the last 50 years, has that changed, and these changes have allowed gynocentrism to mushroom. Once survival became less of an issue and safety, prosperity, nutrition, and human health improved by many orders of magnitude, and society became mechanized and women gained control over their fertility, the constraints on gynocentrism growing beyond a certain threshold were removed and societal focus began to shift more and more from survival to a gynocentric lens. Combined with these changes were communications technologies that allowed superstimuli to have an unprecedented mass effect on the population. The printing press, television, computers, smartphones, the internet, and so forth have allowed superstimuli to have much greater effects on conditioning human behavior and the psychological development of children than ever before. Marketing in particular has made multi-billion-dollar industries out of exploiting superstimuli. As a result of these changes, gynocentrism has rapidly grown over the last few centuries and particularly in the last 50 years. We now have runaway gynocentrism. Eventually, like a runaway train approaching a cliff, runaway gynocentrism will destroy civilization if society does not find the brakes in time. We have, in my estimation, about 20 years before we reach that cliff and society runs off the rails into the abyss. It is now a race against the clock to wake as many people up from their hypnotic daze as we can. We can see right now the fertility rates plummeting in every developed nation thanks to constantly pandering to the needs and wants of women and girls. Social scientists are calling it the demographic winter linked. Pandering to the princess culture of female entitlement mentality, as Australian columnist Miranda Devine calls it, linked, does not produce offspring. Societies that succumb to runaway gynocentrism die out. Of course, there are also long-term consequences building from the decades of neglect of boys' needs in the education system and the epidemic of fatherlessness that will threaten the societal cohesion and economic prosperity of a number of developed nations in the coming decades. Not only will gynocentric societies shrink and then die out, they will descend into poverty, crime, and civil unrest before they disappear. Gynocentrism is widespread because we consider it to be normal, and the culture reinforces it as a good thing. Imagine how much more common obesity or gambling addiction would be if the culture normalized and encouraged overeating and gambling. Imagine how much more common overeating and obesity and gambling addiction would be if you were encouraged to overeat and gamble from birth. Now, why do we consider gynocentrism to be normal? There are 10 reasons or causes for this. Number 1. The influence of women. Part of the reason gynocentrism is normal is because it is encouraged by women. A casino does not want to discourage you from gambling your life savings. Women, generally speaking, do not want to discourage men from getting married despite being fully aware of the biased divorce and family court process. There is no incentive for women to discourage men from gynocentrism and every incentive to do the complete opposite, and they do. The difference between gynocentrism and the casino example is that women constitute half of society and also raise you from birth, and casinos do not. The food industry, as powerful as they are not half the population and are not your mother. When you consider the role of women in men's lives as mothers, sisters, wives, and girlfriends, and the fact that women generally are part of the most important and intimate relationships men have in their lives, it is not difficult to see how gynocentrism can be spread and become normalized in society if women promote it. When women constitute the voting majority and control the majority of consumer spending, it is not hard to see how gynocentrism can become mainstream in the economy and in politics. This is especially true when women exercise an in-group bias, which research studies linked report is the case. On top of those realities is the fact that men can and do white knight for female attention and approval. The enforcement of women's desires on the rest of society through female control over legions of male simps, politicians, and corporations cannot be overlooked in normalizing gynocentrism in the culture. Number 2, the change in family structure. The change in family structure over the last 50 years has also played a major role in the normalization of gynocentrism. We learn the gynocentric social mode of behavior to a significant degree from our childhood upbringing in the household. When boys and girls are raised to adopt and expect male chivalry, then it is likely that behavior will be exhibited by them when they get older. When boys and girls are raised with the message that it is never okay to hit a woman, but never told the message that it is never okay to hit a man, they internalize the double standard. Over the last 50 years, there's been dramatic changes in family structure. Many children are now being raised in fatherless homes from birth, or have been alienated from their fathers through divorce and family court. The lack of an adult male influence in the home, combined with the lack of men in the education system, exacerbates gynocentric double standards being internalized in children and future generations. We also know the important role fathers play in teaching boys and girls to regulate their emotional and instinctual impulses through teaching them to postpone gratification. We are now starting to see the impact of fathers being removed from the family in the declining social behavior of wider society. We now have groups of young people and political movements fueled entirely on emotional impulse and the abandonment of reason and evidence. SJWs, university campus feminists, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, the women's marches, etc. being examples. We are living in a post-factual world where what feels good is more important than what is true. This is what happens in a fatherless society, and it will eventually lead to societal collapse as it gets worse. Number 3, the prosperity of modern civilization. A subtle reason for why we consider gynocentrism to be normal is because the prosperity of modern civilization cushions society from the consequences of it in the short term. Our current debt-based monetary system and welfare state, combined with major advances in technology, allows society to pass on the cost of ignoring major social problems onto future generations. It takes years, decades, and in some cases centuries before the severe and long-lasting consequences of gynocentrism hit individuals and society. So society does not learn very easily to draw a link between gynocentric behavior and the consequences of such behavior. You do not immediately feel the consequences of divorce and family court when you marry a female psychopath. Economies do not feel the burden straight away of large numbers of unemployed men arising from decades of inaction on addressing the boy crisis in education. Societies don't feel the consequences of fatherlessness straight away either, or the long-term consequences of social witch hunts like Me Too. Universities do not immediately feel the financial consequences of lawsuits against them from the men falsely accused of rape, resulting from university policies enacted from the Dear Colleague letter. Number 4, virtue signaling. Gynocentrism is also normalized because on the surface it appears to be a good behavior. It feels good and is therefore encouraged by the culture. However, when considered with more thoughtful and detailed examination, it can be seen that this is not the case. White knighting appears to be a noble act on the surface, but not when we look into the details of what is going on. Human beings are prone to surface thinking, simple heuristic thinking, and emotional bias. Marketing is so successful because it takes full advantage of these biases and cognitive shortcuts human perception employs to make sense of the world. See the elaboration likelihood model linked for more info and check out the central versus peripheral route to persuasion. What may look and feel good and righteous on the surface is not always the case. Number 5. The proliferation of gynocentric superstimuli and mass communication. Of course, it is also predictable that gynocentrism will be normalized when our environment is swamped with superstimuli. That trains our brains through conditioning over many years to operate in a gynocentric mode. This consistent exposure has long-term effects on the brain through neuroplasticity. When gynocentric superstimuli is all you are exposed to every waking hour from birth until death, and there is so much social pressure on you to conform to gynocentric social norms, it is predictable gynocentrism will be normalized in the society in question. We have a plethora of laws against broadcasting violent ads, shows, and movies, and against promoting gambling, and yet nothing like that for gynocentrism. When you combine gynocentric superstimuli with modern communication in the form of the internet, television, computers, and smartphones, you have the perfect delivery system to condition society and normalize gynocentric behavior. And that is the conclusion of Part 1 of the AntiGynocentrist essay on the normalization of gynocentrism. When I return with Part 2, I will start with the final 5 of 10 reasons why we have normalized gynocentrism in modern society. But for now, we'll see you next time.